Who are Iranians? What do they say? What do they think? What are they capable of?
Why revolution? Who do you believe was behind it? The CIA?
Is a positive note to it. America might say, well, we want to leave them alone. They won't leave you alone.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you can hear me, let me know. I was having a little bit of audio issues with the video. I'm going to see if I can remove it and add it again. So if you guys can hear me, let me know. Give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. So today we are going to be
Iranians. What do they say?
There we go. Today we are going to be speaking about Iran and the Iranian revolution, the current Iranian revolution. We're also going to be touching upon the Islamic, some people call it the revolution. I prefer to call it the Islamic coup d'etat, right? Because it really was a hostile takeover, and it wasn't really a revolution in the sense that we think it is. A huge hello to everyone on YouTube. Thank you for joining me in the chat. Greetings to you. I see people from South Africa, from Israel, from United States, from Iran. Hello and welcome to you all. All right, so we are going to get started. This is a very important interview, and it has not received enough attention. And I'm probably going to play this interview, various clips of it several times, because a lot of people ask, one of the biggest questions that non-Iranians have is, if Iranians hate the Islamic Republic, if Iranians don't want to be governed by Islam, why did they bring this in? Why did they choose this? The truth and the reality is that the 1979 revolution was not about Islam. In fact, the Islamists at the time who were getting involved had made it very clear that they have no intention of ruling, right? They have no intention of controlling Iran. And they also said, we have no intention of turning Iran into an Islamic state. Of course, they lied, as Islamists do. It's part of taqiyya. It's, how they operate. And so we're going to dive deep into what the current Shah of Iran in exile, His Royal Highness King Reza Pahlavi, thinks about all of this. And he speaks very candidly. He speaks very openly. And the reason that I am going to be playing this interview today is because he will be speaking at an event later today in Toronto. It's an event called Cyrus the Great. So it's in honor of the birthday of the founder of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great. So we have a big celebration, or there is a big celebration organized, and the Shah in exile of Iran will be speaking at that event. So let's begin with this interview from Prager U, and he's going to break it down for you. And I'm also going to pause here and there to see if anyone in the chat has any questions. Of course, like I think I mentioned, I respond to super chats, and I display your comments or questions on the live stream as well. So let's begin, and thank you for joining, everyone.
Say, what do they think? What are they capable of?
Why revolution?
Let's go to the
Who are Iranians? What do they say? What do they think? What are they capable of?
Why revolution? Who do you believe was behind it? The CIA, the Russians, the Marxists? I've heard all kinds of theories.
I really believe that if the revolution had not happened, Iran should be by now South Korea of the Middle East.
Instead, we have become
the North Korea.
The new Iran. What does that look like?
There is a positive note to it. America might say, well, we want to leave them alone. They won't leave you alone. It has to be declawed. If not now, when? How many more generations have to be sacrificed?
Your Highness Crown Prince of Iran, welcome to Prager U. It is a great honor to have you here.
I'm very glad to be here today and talk to you and be on your program. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, this is going to be a fascinating conversation, and I have many questions for you. But I actually want to start by doing something that I typically don't do at the beginning of an interview, and that is to thank you. I will surely thank you at the end, but I feel like you deserve a thank you from many of my Iranian friends who I have here living in the United States, who expressed to me that you have given them so much hope. Not only have you given them hope that things will get better in Iran, in your country, but you have also been the embodiment of what Iranians are really. And for many Americans living in the United
I just want to pause there. So she's absolutely right. King Reza Pahlavi has given many of us hope that we can overthrow the terrorist Islamic Republic and that we will overthrow the Islamic Republic. Again, it is one of the most brutal totalitarian dictatorships in the world. But he's given us hope because he has been fighting this fight for 46 years, right? Ever since the Islamic Republic happened, he has dedicated his life to freeing Iran. And the reason he gives us so much hope is because he speaks with such eloquence and such elegance. And his message has always been the same. It's been a message of hope. And he doesn't beat around the bush. He answers all of the difficult questions as well. And he gives us hope because he is part of a dynasty, the Pahlavi dynasty, that modernized Iran, right? So we Iranians have a lot of respect for the Pahlavi dynasty, starting with his great-grandfather, Reza Shah the Great, followed by his father, Shahanshah Aryamir, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, and now to Reza Shah II himself. And when you look at the history of the Pahlavi dynasty, they modernized Iran. They brought Iran forward. Women in Iran had the right to vote before women in Switzerland. He's going to get more into this, but I just wanted to explain why he's given us hope. The other thing he has done is he has worked very hard to make the world realize that there is a difference between Iranians, people like me, versus the Islamic Republic, which are basically a group of savage jihadi terrorists who murder Iranians in the name of Allah and Islam. They murder Americans in the name of Allah and Islam. They murder people in the Middle East. Like, they basically murder everyone in the name of Allah and Islam, right? And they wage this never-ending jihad against Israel, against the United States. And their goal is to essentially create this Islamic caliphate. And people think that this is coming from Iran. No, this is coming from the Islamic Republic. And my birth country of Iran was unfortunately one of the first victims of this Islamic colonization and oppression by the Islamic Republic. So we're going to dive deeper into that. But I just wanted to lay it out there for you, the reason that he's giving us Iranians hope.
United States, especially of my generation and younger, our experience with Iran has been terrorism and killing and death and terrible human rights abuses and, the treatment of women. And what we've heard has happened to young women like Masha Amini. And so when we hear about that regime in Iran and we associate all of that evil, it's been a blessing to us to know people like you and like the Iranians who do live here in the United States, who, in my opinion, are some of the most reasonable people I know. They're incredibly kind. They're incredibly warm. Best food ever. Almost all of them are successful entrepreneur, totally rational people. And I just have such a huge love for the Iranian people that reconciling the huge difference between the Iranians that I know and people like you versus the Iranians that I hear about in the Middle East, it's I have a great sense of gratitude to people like you who've really held up what Iranians are about. And so I just want to start by just saying thank you. Thank you for everything you've already done.
Well, I'm just doing my job, and it's my duty to serve the best interests of my compatriots by at least being their voice to begin with, and hopefully then some.
And you have been. For people who know very little about Iran, it is the more you study Persia and the region, the more actually fascinating it becomes, because that region has given birth to so many different societies, I guess, in some ways. Can you describe to us what has happened over, let's say, the last 100 years or so, since your grandfather became the ruler and then your father, and what happened with you, and why did you end up in exile?
Mm-hmm. Actually, when you look at the legacy, the way people now look upon what my grandfather and my father did as the architect of modern Iran. In fact, they call my family the Iran building family. Demonstrates that the view was we can bring Iran from the, sort of underdeveloped country where most people were uneducated.
Yeah, so he's basically saying very politically correctly that his grandfather and then his father brought Iran forward out of the dark ages, because the previous dynasty, the Qajar dynasty, they were terrible. They were basically under the control of the Ottomans and various other foreign powers, and they did nothing for Iran. They were incredibly corrupt. And under the Qajar dynasty, Iran had turned into a very poor nation. People were starving. There was a lot of poverty, very little education, a lot of tribalism. And it was the Pahlavi dynasty with his grandfather, Reza Shah the Great. Let me see. I'll find a photo of Reza Shah. I'll find a photo of him here. Let me just download this, and then that way I can refer to it when I need to. Just go to documents, shows, Pahlavi. All right, so let me pull up this picture of him so you can see exactly who I am referring to. So this is Reza Shah the Great, okay? So this is the grandfather of the current Shah of Iran. So prior to him becoming the Shah, I believe it was don't quote me on this. It was either 21 or 23, 1921 or 1923. He became the Shah of Iran through a vote, by the way, right? So it's not like a lot of people, this is where the whole Islamist communist lies come in, right? They claim that he basically took over. No, he didn't. It was through a constitutional process. So the democratically elected parliament at the time, called Majlis. Yes, if you didn't know, Iran has been a constitutional monarchy since 1906. So the democratically elected parliament at the time actually voted to get rid of the Qajar king at the time and voted to have him become the new Shah of Iran. So the Pahlavi dynasty were legitimately there. And to me, they're still the legitimate rulers of Iran. So this is the grandfather of the current Shah of Iran. So let's
continue. To a country that in the 70s was thriving, had a strong economy. Iranians were educating themselves, were coming back to Iran to bring in whatever was necessary in terms of development and infrastructure. So I think it's really in the last 100 years, because my grandfather stepped into the scene towards the second quarter of the 20th century, 1926 more or less. And he served first as the commander of the armies, was prime minister, and then he was prompted into the scene as a result of the previous dynasty, sort of shying away from carrying their responsibilities, and he was called upon to step in and sort of literally take over power. And in fact, my grandfather wanted to first establish a republic in Iran, based on the model of Ataturk that he admired a lot next door in Turkey. Mm. And interestingly enough, the clerics at the time and many of the people in the Iranian sort of elite were saying, it won't work here. You should, crown yourself as the next king and form the new dynasty, which is what he did. So that's how it all started. And so for about 50 years, the Pahlavi dynasty was in place until we reached the point where the revolution happened. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that. So I think Iran really began to flourish when we started, especially post-Second World War, where we were able to start producing our oil and selling it at a higher price. We created enough revenue so you can start really spending it on copious projects of modernization, development, factories, dams, roads, schools, everything that was needed. And that's how we started getting some traction. And Iranians, at the time of my grandfather, Iran's income per capita was around $400. Towards the end, it was over 2,800, and it was sort of like really increasing. And so I think people saw that Iran is progressively on track for development, for prosperity, for people's life improving at every level. But I think the most important element that, especially now, in contrast to where Iran was and what it is under this regime, is how much was done, especially for the women in Iran. Mm-hmm. And that would really happen at the time of my father. Of course, my grandfather was the first one to say.
Guys, so pay attention to this part, because one of the main reasons for the Islamic Revolution was the fact that the Pahlavi dynasty were not only modernizing Iran, but they were promoting women's rights and women's equality, right? And so that upset the Islamists, that upset the hardcore religious clerics who believed and still believe that women are second-class citizens and should be treated as such. So this was one of the tensions, right? That was in place there with the Pahlavi dynasty modernizing Iran, and of course everyone welcoming that. But then you had the Islamists starting to push back against that. Let me go back a little bit here.
Around $400. Towards the end, it was over 2,800, and it was sort of like really increasing. And so I think people saw that Iran is progressively on track for development, for prosperity, for people's life improving at every level. But I think the most important element that, especially now, in contrast to where Iran was and what it is under this regime, is how much was done, especially for the women in Iran. Mm-hmm. And that would really happen at the time of my father. Of course, my grandfather was the first one to say that people should be free to wear the veil or not, the hijab issue. And of course, he led by example by having his own daughters go out in public without wearing any, veil. And that was one way to liberate women from having to be castigated into, that. And the symbolism of it is so obvious, because even when Mahsa happened a year ago, you see how much that is a symbol of where we were. And women were integrated in all form or shape into not just members of society, but actual participants in governance. Iranian women achieved suffrage 4 years before the women in Switzerland did.
Wow.
There were family laws to protect families and women's rights. They were given opportunities to become ministers, judges, even serve in the armed forces. It was a completely different situation, as opposed to what this regime has done and turned.
So let me share with you a photo of women politicians in Iran prior to the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Let me just pull this up here for you guys so you can see exactly what it is that he is talking about. So let me add this. Okay, I got to remove that and add. There you go. So there we go. That's those are Iranian MPs, right, before 1979. So that's what Iranian women looked like. That's what they dressed like, right? Like, I mean, you can't tell if that's Iran or any other normal Western country. So anyone who says Iran was like, Islamic and has always been Islamic, they have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know their history, or perhaps they do know their history and they're just part of the global jihad caliphate, right? And so this is why all of these people are constantly threatening and are constantly like attacking Iranians who speak out against the Islamic Republic, and they're also constantly attacking
second-class citizens.
They're also attacking this gentleman here, the Shah of Iran in exile, because he is the only person who can and will free Iran. So all of these communists and Islamists, they view him as a threat. But the important thing here is that, listen to Iranians, listen to what Iranians say and what Iranians want. And in a previous live stream, I shared with you a video that recently came out of Iran where people in Iran are literally yelling Javid Shah, which means long live the king, which is basically Iranian for, we want our king to return. And they're referring to this gentleman here. So, ignore all of the nonsense, ignore all of the propaganda out there. I'm giving you the real facts. And this is something that you're never going to hear about in the mainstream media. You're never going to hear about this in the news because this counters the Islamist narrative that is being pushed so hard by certain groups and certain people with an agenda, right? So let's continue.
So I think that's a little bit of modern history of where Iran started to go. And I really believe that if the revolution had not happened, Iran should be by now, if not the second Japan of the Middle East, but at least the South Korea of the Middle East.
Not the North Korea.
The North Korea. So it's not the people that have changed or our resources being depleted. It's just the nature of the regime. And in fact, I'd like to take the opportunity, since you talk about Iran and Iranians, we feel sometimes very frustrated whenever something happens, media or political leaders say, Iran did this, Iran did that. I will urge you to help us correct that by saying, this is not Iran and Iranians. This is the regime in Iran. So it's the Islamic regime, not the Iranian people. That's one way to distinguish.
This is so true. This is why I always make a difference between the Islamic Republic and Iran, right? Because we're Iranians, we are occupied by the Islamic Republic, and it's the Islamic Republic that is responsible for all of the terrorism you're seeing in the Middle East. It's responsible for all of the violence you're seeing against Israel. And of course, it's responsible for all of the terrorism and anti-Semitism you're seeing in Western countries, right? That's all being funded by the Islamic Republic because they are pushing their Islamic caliphate and they're indoctrinating people in the West with this anti-Semitic ideology. So, this is why we always urge people, and, again, you heard it from His Royal Highness, King Reza Pahlavi, we urge people in media to make that distinction between Iran and the Islamic Republic, because the problem isn't Iran. The problem is the Islamic Republic. The problem is that jihadi Islamofascist ideology that not only took over Iran in 1979, but is now, making its way around the world. And unless and until you can actually identify the source of the problem, you won't be able to treat it. And I think there is a deliberate intent to conflate Iran with the Islamic Republic because they don't want people to know that the problem is not Iran. The problem is the Islamic Republic, right? The problem is their jihadi Islamic ideology. Let me go back here because that's such a critical point, and I want him to say that again.
Resources being depleted. It's just the nature of the regime. And in fact, I'd like to take the opportunity, since you talk about Iran and Iranians, we feel sometimes very frustrated whenever something happens, media or political leaders say, Iran did this, Iran did that. I will urge you to help us correct that by saying, this is not Iran and Iranians. This is the regime in Iran. So it's the Islamic regime, not the Iranian people. That's one way to distinguish the aspiration of Iranians from the doing of the regime. That perception by itself is important. At the beginning, especially when the hostages were taken in the American embassy in Tehran, and of course Khomeini had just hit the scene, I remember during that time leading to the revolution, I was still in Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas. And I can already see that sense of hostility against Iranians who had no fault whatsoever just to be Iranian. My own wife, who was studying in school in the Bay Area, was beaten up by some of her classmates just because she was an Iranian. But I think we have come a long way. I think many Iranians, especially those living in the United States, and for Americans who have interacted, example yourself, with Iranians, by now should know the difference between what actual Iranians believe or think, as opposed to what the regime is projecting as being, something that is totally alien to us in terms.
He makes a really good point. I mean, most people don't even know that they're like interacting with an Iranian unless like we tell them, because we're just culturally our culture and our values are very similar to Western culture and values. And so Iranian immigrants, we assimilate quite well, right? I mean, you also have to think about this. 10% of the Iranian population live outside of Iran. That's actually a significant amount, right? Like, so there's about 9 million Iranians who live around the world. Many have escaped the Islamic Republic as refugees. And yet you never hear about, the Iranian refugee problem. You never hear about mass migration of Iranians. It's because to this day, there still hasn't been like that sort of mass migration the same way that you see from like other places. You also never see a lot of problems with Iranian immigrants, right? Because the vast majority of us, and I'm not saying all, there's, always bad apples everywhere, but the vast majority of Iranian immigrants, when they go to a country, they go there to assimilate, they go there to contribute, they go there to be part of, society. And many Iranians are, highly productive members of society, whether they're lawyers or engineers, or, in my case, I was a politician for 7 years. There's people who own companies, right? Like I think the CEO or one of the creators of Uber was Iranian. So all these things, right? And people don't really know this, and people don't really think about it. And that's because as Iranians, we integrate into the societies that we are in because we appreciate that Western society. We value the Western way of living because that's what Iran was going towards before the Islamic Republic came and turned our country into a 7th century Islamic hellhole governed by Sharia law.
In terms of values, in terms of beliefs, in terms of principles.
Let me go back a little bit here.
Had no fault whatsoever just to be Iranian. My own wife, who was studying in school in the Bay Area, was beaten up by some of her classmates just because she was an Iranian. But I think we have come a long way. I think many Iranians, especially those living in the United States, and for Americans who have interacted, example yourself, with Iranians, by now should know the difference between what actual Iranians believe or think, as opposed to what the regime is projecting as being, something that is totally alien to us in terms of values, in terms of beliefs, in terms of principles. And that's where all the problem started and continues to exist.
You describe Iran as this prosperous economic society, right? And the revolution happens. If people were happy in Iran, presumably they were doing well financially and things were growing, why revolution? Who do you believe was behind it? Was it really from within? Or was it Carter? Was it the UK? Was it the fight over oil? Was it the Russians, the Marxists? I mean, I've heard all kinds of theories on who took Iran down and why. And I'm curious, what do you believe is the truth?
Well, there were two main.
Guys, this is very important. I'm probably going to do another episode where I speak only about the reason behind the Islamic Revolution, and I'm going to share various opinions and thoughts. But this right here is probably the most concise answer, and it also really brings all the various elements together. And pay attention, because what he's about to talk about is similar to what is currently happening in Western societies, where you see the communists and the Islamists, right? So you have the pro-Hamas, pro-Pahlavi people who have aligned with the Antifa, progressives, whatever. That unholy alliance is very dangerous to Western societies. And he's going to talk about that because we've already seen this play out in Iran in 1979.
Major groups that were opposed to the.
Oh, I just wanted to give a shout out to Ahmed Gulshan. Thank you for becoming a member. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your support. Welcome.
Way Iran was the direction it had taken. Everything that I explained regarding women's rights and things what were happening, the clergy didn't look at that very favorably. And Khomeini, in fact, started everything when my father instigated the white revolution at the time that brought in all these elements. He was the first one to start speaking against it and build that sort of rejection by the Islamists or the fundamentalists there. On the other hand, you had the Marxist forces who didn't like this rapprochement with the West in general and, in their sort of anti-imperialist, anti-Western rhetoric, sort of partnered with the Islamists.
Does that ring a bell with you guys? Like when he's talking about the anti-Western, anti-imperialist rhetoric, that's exactly what the rhetoric is at like the pro-Hamas jihadi Palestine rallies or whatever, right? Where they talk about dismantling the settler colonial state and all of that as well. So yeah, oh gosh. Unusual AI. You always have the funniest comments. Thank you for the Zio propaganda. I mean, I am a Zionist. I do believe in the right of the state of Israel to exist. I'm Yisrael Chai. So Zionist, guys, Zionist is not a bad word. I don't know why. I mean, these like jihadis, like they throw the word Zionist around as if it's some insult. Guys, Zionist basically just means that you believe in the right for the state of Israel to exist. And, of course, as Iranians, we do, because our civilizations go back thousands of years and, well before Islam was invented. So yeah, you're welcome for the Zionist propaganda, I guess. Okay. So let's go back and listen to this. But this is what I wanted to say. So this rhetoric and this narrative that you are hearing, right, in these pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine rallies or whatever they call them, where they talk about dismantling the settler colonial state, they talk about anti-imperialism, and even though they're in the United States, they burn the American flag. Even though they're in Canada, they burn the Canadian flag. This anti-imperialism rhetoric is perfectly aligned with the Islamist rhetoric, right? So they both have the same goal. They both want to undermine and destabilize Western society. They both want to take over for various reasons. And so this anti-imperialist rhetoric that he is speaking about, right, that was happening in 1979 is happening again today in Western countries.
Chris, what do you believe is the truth?
Well, there were two major groups that were opposed to the way Iran was, the direction it had taken. Everything that I explained regarding women's rights and things what were happening, the clergy didn't look at that very favorably. And Khomeini, in fact, started everything when my father instigated the white revolution at the time that brought in all these elements. He was the first one to start speaking against it and build that sort of rejection by the Islamists or the fundamentalists there. On the other hand, you had the Marxist forces who didn't like this rapprochement with the West in general and, in their sort of anti-imperialist, anti-Western rhetoric, sort of partnered with the Islamists. And that was the root cause that brought about that moment where there were forces at play that took it to that level of leading to this revolution. And interestingly enough, I think that now the children of that generation who in 1957, Iranian calendar, 57, which is 1979, were part of it, turned back to their parents and said, what the hell were you thinking? What was lacking? The maximum we could argue might be that maybe in terms of political liberalization, we were not quite there yet, but we were going in that direction. And they were saying, well, a lot of reforms could have happened and we could have avoided having a revolution. But instead, we opted to bring in some cleric that we believed would be just a very benign, sort of symbolic leader retiring in the city of Qom and allowing for all these promised liberties. And instead, we ended up with what we have. And by the time we realized what it was too late. And contrary to that, there's been decades of insisting on bringing reform to a regime that is irreformable. So it's the sort of tragedy in all this is that
So there's one thing he said very important. He said that there's been this decades-long policy of trying to reform the Islamic Republic, but it's irreformable. And that's absolutely correct. Um, we call this the reformist narrative. So what is the reformist narrative? The reformist narrative is basically people who work for the Islamic regime. They lobby for the Islamic regime in the United States. There's one particular lobby group. It's called the National Iranian American Council, NIAC. They're 100% pro-Islamic Republic. They're based out of Washington. They constantly push to legitimize the Islamic Republic. And how do they do it? They say, oh, no, like we can change them. We can change them. Why do they do this? Because they keep on wanting to kick the can down the road for every US administration, right? Because their only goal is to keep the Islamic Republic in power because that's where they get their paycheck from. So what we have been trying to tell you and what I'm telling you today is that the Islamic Republic is not reformable. You cannot reform terrorists. You cannot reform an organization, let's call it, whose very core foundational pillar is jihad, right? You cannot reform an organization that has death to America as one of its official policies, right? Like these people literally go out there in their own parliament and they're chanting death to America, right? So you cannot reason with these people. You cannot reform them. You cannot change them. The only thing that can be done is to delegitimize them, right? And what we Iranians are saying is we're not saying go to war. We don't want war. What we're saying is stop legitimizing the Islamic Republic, stop throwing them financial and economic lifelines. Let the Iranian people overthrow them. Let the Iranian people overthrow the Islamic Republic and take their country back.
The opportunity cost to Iran and Iranians has been huge in terms of these past 4.5 decades since the revolution. However, there is a positive note to it, as crazy as it may sound. But it is really in the sense of some of the cornerstones of liberty and justice and the rule of law in any democracy, and that is the separation of church from state. In other words, a secular system. I want to emphasize this point as strongly as I can, because I think from the point of view of Americans, when they look at the American Constitution, when they look at the fact that Thomas Jefferson was inspired by Cyrus the Great to build in those values of human rights and liberty into the American Bill of Rights and Constitution, there's something that has to do with the history of our country. And we are proud as descendants of Cyrus to be represented in that. But what can we do for ourselves? And how can we have the same system in our country? Because a lot of people say, well, Iran was a Muslim country. How do we deal with these religious elements? Is this really what they are? Not. And in fact, Iran was perhaps one of the most secular countries in the region before.
Yeah, again, so here. These are women politicians in Iran prior to 1979. Right? Like, do they look, Islamic to you? Right? I mean, yeah, Iran was a Muslim majority country at the time. The vast majority of people were practicing Muslims, but they were not Islamic, right? Like Iran was a secular country. It was a secular modernizing country. Iran didn't become an Islamic country until 1979 when the Islamic Republic took our country hostage. But prior to that, I mean, again, look, women politicians, they look like they could be politicians in Canada, right? I mean, this is the outfit. This is what I would wear when I would go to the Ontario legislature to speak, right? So Iran was incredibly secular. This is what the Islamists don't want you to know about, right? They want people in the West, they want non-Iranians to think that we're all just a bunch of like savage jihadis who yell Allah Akbar and death to America all day, every day, right? And that's completely not the case. It's the farthest thing from the truth. I have another start comment, guys, so I'm going to share this and I'm going to read it for you guys. So Pidram says, Iranians trust only in Pahlavism, 100%. The alliance of red and black is dead. Leftists, feminists, communists, and globalists have all played their games for 46 years, but none of them have been successful. I completely agree with you, Pedram. I think the last time that the Islamists and the progressives and all those people were really able to fool Iranians, I think was really with the sort of the green movement, Jombish Sabs or whatever, back in like 2012. And that's where the whole reformist narrative came. But I think ever since then, it's been less and less effective. And now it's come to the point where all of those like progressive, lefty, communists, whatever, they basically have zero importance and zero influence in Iran amongst Iranians, right? They have pretty much become professional grifters, and all they do is they just want to keep this going. Like, if anything, I actually think that these, lefties and communists and human rights activists want Iran to remain occupied because for them it's a professional grift. That's how they make their money, and if when Iran is free, they're going to lose all of their funding. So I think they're definitely part and parcel of that. And you're right, Iranians are done with it. The only person we trust, the only person that we want to
revolution
see back in Iran is King Reza Pahlavi. And this is why all of these various factors are feeling incredibly threatened. And it's also why they're attacking him, because he has done something that no other Iranian opposition leader has been able to do. He has united Iranians across Iran. He has united Iranians outside of Iran. He has united Iranians of different backgrounds, different faiths, different religions, different cultural, minorities, everything, right? He's even united those Iranians who, because there's some Iranians who want a constitutional monarchy. There's some who want a republic. I'm personally a big fan of constitutional monarchy. That's what I want to go back to, because I believe in that particular democratic system. And again, that's what Iran was prior to 1979. But he has even managed to unite the Republicans and the constitutional monarchists, because right now our fight is against the Islamic Republic. And that is why you're seeing a lot of people, especially in the chat, they're incredibly triggered, right? Because they know that the end is near. They know that the Islamic Republic will be overthrown. They know that the only person who is able to do it is King Reza Pahlavi. And that is why they are constantly attacking him, right? Because if he was irrelevant, let me put it this way. If he was irrelevant, people wouldn't be attacking him. If he was irrelevant, people wouldn't care, right? But everyone is here and they're trying to attack. And so for those of you who are watching live right now and you're checking the live chat, this is the reason why. And the reason I'm allowing them to continue their spam comments is to give you a better sense and understanding of how these people have tried to silence Iranians and gaslight us for the last 47 years. But it's just not working anymore. The movement is too big. Our support is growing exponentially every day, and we're just going to keep on going. The end of the Islamic Republic is near, and this is the man who's going to free it, who's going to free Iran from the Islamic Republic.
But we had to experience directly the consequences
Let me go back a little bit here.
Represented in that. But what can we do for ourselves? And how can we have the same system in our country? Because a lot of people say, well, Iran was a Muslim country. How do we deal with these religious elements? Is this really what they are? Not. And in fact, Iran was perhaps one of the most secular countries in the region before the revolution. But we had to experience directly the consequences of a religious dictatorship. It's a little bit like the Inquisition in Europe that led to Enlightenment. And now you're talking about an Islamic Inquisition in Iran and what could happen post that. in terms of returning to our roots and a country where different religions lived together side by side for centuries. Christians, Zoroastrians, Jews, Baha'is, Muslims, and we never had issues until this regime emerged. And that's a very important lesson that Iranians had to learn the hard way, but puts us in the best possible position to navigate this challenge and land on solid grounds in the future once this regime is finally brought down.
So do you think that the people who voted for the revolution, were they duped? Is that what happened? Were they basically tricked? Was it that the Marxists and the Islamists came together and created this new version of politicized Islam that controlled the media and lied to people, and people didn't realize really what they're stepping into? Because it's almost like an oxymoron to combine Marxism with religious Islam, because Marxism is really not about religion. And so the marriage of those two seemed quite bizarre, except for the purpose of political control and corruption. And so were the Iranians basically tricked? Was it planned that this would happen, or is it just a terrible accident and just a very, very unfortunate situation?
So this is really, really important. He's going to dive in a little bit into the reason for the Islamic Revolution. So pay attention to this part, because this is going to answer a lot of your questions about what exactly happened in 1979, because there is a lot of disinformation out there right now.
Well, you can imagine that in these 4 decades, ever since I was plunged into the scene of Iranian politics and opposition politics and what have you, I had discussions with many Iranians, including many who were the most aggressive opponents of my father's regime, belonging to the same category of people you just described. And in our conversation, they often said that, we now realize what we didn't know then. And most of them admit that we made a mistake. But the truth is that it was such a frenzy, it was such a euphoria, that you could not have a rational discussion. We had university professors swearing that they saw with their own eyes Khomeini's face in the moon.
So the level of insanity and I don't know, it almost became cult-like, right? Like, he's not joking. There were people who basically said that Khomeini, right, like the evil Ayatollah who replaced the Shah, they said that he is destined to take over and be the leader because they saw his face in the moon, right? Khomeini. And there was actually articles about this, right? Here, let me show this to you. So here's here's a screenshot. Wait, I got to put it up on the screen here. Okay, I gotta remove this. Okay. So you see this? Like, this says Ruhollah Khomeini on the moon. So there was literally an article from January 14, right? It's a Farsi article, and it says مردم تهران دیشب دیده به ماه دوختند. Okay, so basically it says last night the people in Tehran, saw his face in the moon, right? Like, this is the cult-like insanity of the Islamists, where they literally, you had people in mass because they, for whatever reason, there was this weird religious fervor saying that they saw the Ayatollah's face in the moon. And now, we're all laughing at these idiots. But I mean, this is the danger of falling into that Islamic jihadi cult mentality, right? And this right here is a perfect example of that, right? So when he says people were claiming that they saw the face of the Ayatollah in the moon, he's not joking. There was literally religious fervor about this, right? People were just No, it's not a meme. It's real. I know, like, but this is how the Islamists operate. Like, they're so low IQ, and there's so much nonsense that we as Iranians have dealt with because of the Islamic Republic, that if we literally didn't have documents like this to prove it, you wouldn't believe us. You would not believe the type of nonsense. I mean, these are people who actually come out and say that Israel was successful in its attacks against the Islamic Republic because Israel uses genies. Did you guys know that? Have you seen that? I'll find the video for you because I found the video. I translated it myself and I put it on my X account a while ago. But I'm not joking. There's literally this like crazy Ayatollah here, guys. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, this is the I mean, it's in Farsi, but like, you literally have Ayatollahs who say that Jewish people have access to genies and the cosmic science since the time of David and Solomon, and therefore that's how they were successful. Like, this is the level of intellect when we're dealing with the Islamic regime. These are the people who call themselves like the messengers of Allah or whatever. Like, they literally go on national TV and they claim that Israel uses genies, right? And then back in 1979, they made up so many lies, right? You know, the Ayatollah's face in the moon. Everything that comes out of their mouth is a lie. Even all the nonsense about, you know, the Shah being a dictator, it's all a lie. It's all a lie. And it's so frustrating when I see people who just parrot this, you know, these lies about the Shah being a dictator or whatever. Meanwhile, those same, like the same people who say the Shah was a dictator believe that Israel uses genies. Do you understand how ridiculous these people are? Like, just watch this video. So when he says ajenne means jinns, right? So he's basically saying they have access to jinns. Right, David and Solomon, Davud and Suleiman. So he's saying the Jewish people have access to genies and cosmic science since the time of David and Solomon. And then he says, historically, the Jews have always used genies. Their documents and traditions prove that, right? Like, this is literally what Islamic terrorists think. They legitimately go on like Islamic regime state TV and they claim that Israel and Jewish people use genies. And then it blows my mind that there are people in the West who think that these inbred Islamic savages are any sort of, you know, intellectual or legitimate people whatsoever, right? And then they say they use genies for warfare and intelligence operations throughout history. So apparently there's like a Mossad branch made up of genies or something, right? Again, this is the barbarity of these people, right? Like, this is how barbaric they are. So yeah, of course, like, they made up so many lies. And this is all like the non-harmless stuff. Like, these Islamists murdered Iranians back in the 70s, late 70s. They murdered Iranians and then they blamed the Shah, right? So all of the Shah murdered so many people. It was actually all the Islamists themselves who were murdering Iranians in order to build a case to claim the Shah was a dictator and overthrow him, right? It's the same tactic. It's these people are willing to sacrifice anyone for the cause of their jihad, right? It's the MO of Islamic terrorists. It's what we see in Gaza. It's what we see in Iran. It's what we saw in Iran in 1979. It's what we see in other places as well. So let's go back. So when
talking about,
you know, so when he says that people were claiming they saw the Ayatollah's face in the moon, it's not an exaggeration. It's the truth, because these Islamists are so insane, right, that they will say and do anything in order to legitimize their power. And they lie through their teeth constantly. Like, all they do is lie, lie, lie. So let's go back a little bit so you can hear that part again.
Most of them admit that we made a mistake. But the truth is that it was such a frenzy, it was such a euphoria that you could not have a rational discussion. We had university professors swearing that they saw with their own eyes Khomeini's face in the moon. You're not talking about an uneducated person be subject to some propaganda or brainwashing. This is a university professor saying that. So when the intelligentsia or intellectuals fall into those trappings, they didn't even know what Khomeini really stood for. Nobody had really read his pamphlet, which if you read today, was, I mean, this is just some badness behind it.
So he's referring to Khomeini's Green Book, right? And the Green Book is, let me find something about that, because like there's one thing he said about an earthquake, and it will blow your mind. But like this religious Islamic leader actually wrote about earthquakes. So let me pull it up, because I know like all the trolls in the chat are gonna be like, yeah, she's lying. It's like, no. Khomeini. So I'm gonna find, let's see if I can find this. Khomeini earthquake. It's called like the Ayatollah's Green Book or something. And it is like the most disgusting thing ever. And here, I'm gonna find it here. Gosh, okay, I can't find it now, but wait. I found someone who quoted it. Okay. You guys can look this up yourselves, but basically, here we go. Let me share this with you. Share screen. All right, and then I'm going to add this to the screen. Okay. All right, here we go. So Ayatollah Khomeini. So when King Reza Pahlavi is speaking about that pamphlet, right, the pamphlet with all the bad things in the book, this is an example of one of the things that this Islamic cleric wrote in his book, right? And the book was like, all these like Islamic teachings and whatever, and people were like, oh, this guy's amazing, right? So one of the things that the Islamic cleric wrote in his book was basically a scenario where an earthquake hits your home, you fall through the floor, and your aunt is in the bedroom below. You happen to have an erect, and you happen to land right inside of her. Do you have to stop and pull out? In his book, Khomeini says, no, but you can't marry your aunt's daughter. However, you can marry your aunt's child if you make her pregnant. So basically what he's saying, like he like, this is how insane and sick this individual is, and all of his followers, where he literally wrote this book. It's called the Ayatollah's Green Book, right? I'll find it for you. But he literally wrote this book, and in the book he has like a whole bunch of different scenarios. And here you go. Like, everyone who says I'm lying, like, this is literally the book, right? So he literally wrote a jihadi book. Okay, it's called The Little Green Book. I can't believe it's for sale, but that's insane. But he wrote like this little green book, and in the green book, he basically says that if you
and the whole process, which was
he says in the book that if you fall on your aunt during an earthquake, like if you're on one floor and your aunt is on a different floor, and all of a sudden there's an earthquake and the ceiling breaks and you happen to fall on your aunt and you impregnate her by falling on her, that's not haram, and the child is halal. right? Like, he actually wrote that scenario. And like, I mean, how disgusting do you have to be? How depraved do you have to be to even come up with that sort of scenario, or to even think that that's okay, right? But this is the mentality of the Islamic Republic. So when we tell you that these people are deranged, when we tell you that they are disgusting, when we tell you that they are just vile savages, we're not exaggerating. And again, these are things that all of us, within Iranian society, we know because we have been exposed to it. We've had to deal with it, right? And all of this jihadi nonsense. But non-Iranians don't know. And you guys don't know the depravity of the Islamic Republic. So when, the king here, he's talking about Khomeini's pamphlet and all the bad things within the pamphlet, he's being very, very polite, because one of those bad things is exactly the scenario that I told you about, right? The scenario where the Islamists talk about if you impregnate your aunt because you fall on her during an earthquake, the baby is halal. So let's continue this. But yeah, let me go back a little bit, because now you get the reference for when he talks about the pamphlet and all the bad things in it.
That they saw with their own eyes Khomeini's face in the moon. You're not talking about an uneducated person be subject to some propaganda or brainwashing. This is a university professor saying that. So when the intelligentsia or intellectuals fall into those trappings, they didn't even know what Khomeini really stood for. Nobody had really read his pamphlet, which if you read today, was, this is just some badness behind it. Yeah. And the whole process, which was extremely opaque, obscure, Khomeini started by saying Islamic Republic, and that's it. And people were called to a referendum without even knowing what it's been proposed, voting in plain view with somebody with a Kalashnikov standing on a barrel, and you had to throw either a green or a red, in plain view.
That's the other thing as well. No one ever talks about the fact that the election that happened back in 1979, it wasn't actually a real referendum, because there were, like he just said, there were people there with Kalashnikovs, right, who were watching you vote and seeing how you voted, right? So obviously, no one is going to vote no one's going to vote against. Everyone's going to vote in favor, because you don't want your head shot off, right? You don't want to be murdered for making the wrong choice. So there was no free or fair election or referendum. It was literally an Islamic takeover. It was an occupation. That's what happened in 1979.
So what I'm trying to say is that as it was evolving, the momentum was such in that frenzy, and mostly instigated by these two groups, that what could have possibly been done. Some people retrospectively say, well, maybe the regime was too slow to react to that demand. And I'm not saying there were legitimate demands for liberalization. And a lot of honest, genuine liberals at the time were not wrong. And my father actually wanted to do that. Why would you educate a nation knowing that tomorrow they will have more demands and more need for participation? But we should not forget that this was at the time of the Cold War. This is at the time that some of these groups were affiliated during the bidding of a foreign power. The Tudeh party was basically the instrument of intervention in Iran on behalf of Moscow. It was very clear. Maybe in today's generation, they don't quite relate to that era, but that's how things were at the time. Anyway, the point is that as soon as the regime took over, they started to immediately take on the intelligentsia. They closed universities. They threw professors in jail. What I'm saying is that there was a sudden realization that we cannot stay in this country. They were immediately persecuted if they were a religious minority. Baha'is, Jews had to escape. The first exodus of Iranians that came out of Iran and were lucky enough to be able to escape because of their political persuasions or because of their religious beliefs or because they were members of the previous regime. Anyway, there was a massive brain drain that started early on. And it started creating what today you see in terms of the Iranian diaspora and how affluent and capable they are in terms of creativity. Many of them run corporations, industries, medical centers. And that should be, again, a way for whether you're an American or a foreigner looking, okay, who are Iranians? What do they say? What do they think? What are they capable of? In contrast to what this regime is projecting, that's where you can see the contrast. That's what people in Iran today see as a contrast. The children that were on the streets of Iran protesting in latter years, in various moments, they were the ones who are no longer duped. They do their own due diligence. They do their own research. So there's no more naivete that did exist in 1978, 79.
Sorry, I wanted to bring up a comment by one of our members. So Cyrus, such an important point. And, I referred to this earlier, but you're absolutely right. So one of the triggers of the major protests leading to, the revolution was a fire in Cinema Rex. Cinema Rex was a movie theater in the city of Abadan. And the movie theater basically went on fire. And the Islamists, what they did is while people were inside watching a movie, they barricaded all of the doors, preventing anyone from exiting. And then they lit the cinema on fire, and everyone inside the movie theater was basically burned to death. They were murdered. But the Islamists blamed the Shah. So at the time that this happened, they blamed the Shah of Iran, right? Again, to propagate the narrative that the Shah is a dictator and brutal and murders Iranians, whatever. And that is one of the things that propagated fueled the revolution. But then afterwards, when the Islamists had already taken over and it was too late to go back, people realized, oh, wow, the Islamists lied to us. It was not the Shah that did this. It was the Islamists themselves. Again, right? This ties in directly with the MO of how Islamic terrorists operate. Right. And, it's so all that stuff about the Shah being a dictator, it was absolutely false. The Shah loved his people. All of this death and violence and murder you see was at the cause of the Islamists. It was their fault. They were the ones who were doing it. And it's the same pattern of behavior that you're seeing today in Gaza. And, of course, the attacks against Israel as well. As it was in 1979. The Islamists all operate with the same jihadi mentality. Thank you. Thank you for that, Cyrus. Very important. And, maybe at some point in the future, I will talk about Cinema Rex and expand more on that, because I think that's something that people definitely need to know about in order to understand the lies, right? The lies that are being propagated by the Islamists
at the time of the revolution.
Do you think that any of the Iranians have any resentment towards the West? Are they blaming the CIA or, or the UK? I mean, is there any of that type of resentment there?
Look, let me give you a tacit example of the expectation that exists in Iran in terms of how can the free world come to our help. During the Green Movement, there were a lot of slogans. It was during the Obama administration. And you could see signs that people were holding in the English language to any camera covering it. Clearly, they were not practicing their linguistic skills. They were trying to send you a message. In fact, they were chanting Obama, Obama, Yaba Una, Yaba Ma, which means either with them or with us. Pick your side. And throughout the years, you saw that the messaging coming from Iran, at a time that there was no social media, which makes it more accessible to see what people actually think, was not covered by foreign media. So it was always in the mindset of dealing with the regime, falling into the trappings of, well, there are more moderate elements rather than the more hardcore. Maybe we can reason with them. Maybe we can have a strategy of behavior change and a policy of trying to cut a deal with them and what have you, while Iranians were getting repressed at home. And I think the biggest reproach that Iranians have towards countries like America or its allies in the Western world is that haven't you yet seen the difference between us and our values and our aspirations, which is the very same thing that you as Americans or French enjoy in terms of liberty and justice and human rights in your countries. And instead of helping us get rid of the regime that is taking all the rights from us, you insist on dealing with them over our head and throw us under the bus every time that we face this crisis.
Oh, just shout out to Scott. Thank you for being my newest member and supporting the chat. I really appreciate you. Welcome to the Goldie Club, I guess. I still don't have a name for the memberships. Just the Goldie Club. I don't know what we should come up. You know what? We should come up with a name for everyone who becomes a member. And I'm definitely going to have member only chats at some point as well in the future.
That, I think, is what frustrates many of my compatriots back home. It's just how else are we supposed to defend ourselves unarmed, unequipped against an extremely repressive regime? Why is it
the Goldie Gang? The Goldie Gang? I guess GG, right? The alliteration there works, but okay, I'll think about it. I'll think about that.
That when you know this regime is repressing us at home and is conducting its proxy war abroad, not only you don't put more pressure on them, you reward them by releasing more money to them, which of course is not going to be spent on people in Iran and their economic situation. It's going to be spent on this whole proxy war. And that is adding insult to injury. That's really what I think most Iranians today look upon, why it is that we are being completely ignored and thrown under the bus.
So interesting. Why is it that Iran is involved in proxy wars? Why are they doing this to the world?
Okay, first thing you have.
So this is so frustrating. Like the Shah, literally earlier on, right? He said, I'm asking people to stop conflating Iran with the Islamic Republic, right? Because Iran is occupied by the Islamic Republic. Iran is a nation of, peaceful loving, peace-loving people who just want to live their lives normally. The Islamic Republic is a brutal, jihadi, Islamofascist organization that has occupied Iran and is waging war around the world. And then she literally just makes that same exact mistake. And she says, why does Iran have all these proxy wars? Iran never had proxy wars. Prior to 1979, there were no proxies. There were no Islamic terrorist proxies. It's the Islamic Republic that has created all of these proxies using the stolen money of the Iranian people. So she literally makes that mistake again.
To realize is that you're not talking about a conventional government that wants to take care of its citizenry.
See, let me go back here because this is so important. So he's going to bring out the fact, like what I've been saying, is that the Islamic Republic is not a normal, legitimate government. It is a terrorist organization that has occupied Iran and is using Iran as an ATM to fuel its jihad and terrorism around the world, right? Oh, Scott, thank you for that. I really appreciate the support. Means a lot. Okay, let's go back and listen to this part again, because now he's going to dig into a little bit about why the Islamic Republic is not a legitimate government, right? It is literally a terrorist organization that is occupying Iran and has taken Iran hostage.
That wants to take care of its citizenry. This was not the objective of Khomeini in the first place.
Let me go back a little bit, sorry.
And is conducting its proxy war abroad. Not only you don't put more pressure on them, you reward them by releasing more money to them, which of course is not going to be spent on people in Iran and their economic situation. It's going to be spent on this whole proxy war. And that is adding insult to injury. That's really what I think most Iranians today look upon, why it is that we are being completely ignored and thrown under the bus.
So interesting. Why is it that Iran is involved in proxy wars? Why are they doing this to the world?
Okay, first thing you have to realize is that you're not talking about a conventional government that wants to take care of its citizenry. This was not the objective of Khomeini in the first place. Khomeini simply looked at Iran as a launching pad to export an ideology, to create a modern-day Shiite caliphate, to dominate the region and beyond. In order to do that, you have to be able to use every tool at your disposal in what way you can impose that in the region and beyond. And the proxy war is part of that strategy. And from the very beginning, in fact, the IRGC is mandated.
So IRGC stands for Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So, even the institutions that the Islamic Republic created in 1979 don't have the word Iranian in them, right? So the Islamic Republic is the most anti-Iranian institution in and of itself, right? Like there is nothing Iranian about them. And every organization they created to maintain their own legitimacy and power does not have the word Iranian. It has the word Islamic. A lot of people make that mistake because they just see the word I, and it's, it's just a bunch of, letters put together. So they see IRGC and they think it's Iranian something when it's absolutely not. It's Islamic. It's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was created to protect and maintain the Islamic Republic that's occupying Iran. It's just unfortunate that both words start with the same letter. So people make that mistake between Islamic and Iranian. But IRGC stands for Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
In carrying out the arms part of helping that exportation of this ideology around the globe. It's in their mission statement. And oddly enough, there's nowhere mentioned the word Iran in that organization. They say it's not an Iranian entity. It's called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in support of the regime. Why was it created? And I know the people who are involved in that creation.
Oh, it's Shiva. Thank you so much for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. Very, very kind of you. So, okay, so here the Shah, he just says what I said earlier. He said it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, nothing Iranian about it.
This ideology around the globe. It's in their mission statement. And oddly enough, there's nowhere mentioned the word Iran in that organization. They say it's not an Iranian entity. It's called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in support of the regime. Why was it created? And I know the people who are involved in that creation, because they knew that they cannot trust the army. And therefore, they had to create a buffer between the army, and it started very early on, including when the Iran-Iraq war started. And it was supposed to be a guarantee of protecting the regime from a potential military coup against it by the military.
So a second military that is loyal and reports directly to the current Islamic regime.
And basically for protecting them by not trusting the military and creating that buffer. What happened, of course, next is that this organization became more and more a mafia-like organization, getting involved in every aspect of control and commerce and business in Iran. So that's why it is an entity that is actually powerful because it's in symbiosis with the regime.
How big is it? How many people work for this IRGC?
It's certainly, if not more than the military, or even if there are some military components, a lot of it is controlled by the IRGC. But it has become a point that they really have a lot of clout. And if you look at every time the regime has been intervening regionally, whether in Syria or even in Lebanon and other places, there's some kind of an IRGC entity involved in that aspect.
Yeah, guys, let me give you a little bit of a backgrounder on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, let me just share my screen here. Okay, got to remove this one first. Remove, add. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. Wikipedia, usually not trustworthy, but don't worry. Like I'm going to go through this with you guys, and if there's anything here that's a bit wonky, I'll let you guys know. But so this is a brief primer on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. So what the Shah was saying is very important. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is basically this like paramilitary force that was created after 1979 by the Islamic Republic, and it was made basically to defend the Islamic Republic from the military, right? Because the military always existed. So they created the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to protect the Ayatollahs in the Islamic Republic from the military. And then what they did subsequently is within the military, they also executed all of the top generals and commanders, and then they replaced them eventually with their own people. But there's still not as much trust for the military, which we call the artish in Persian. There's not as much trust for the artish as there is for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? So the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps right now is extremely well funded. The artish, not as much. And people who are within the IRGC generally tend to be much more loyal to the Islamic Republic than those who are within the regular army. However, we are right now at a critical time within the Iranian revolution process, because we know that there are at least at minimum 50,000 people, if not more, who have defected from both the IRGC and the Artish, who have defected from the Islamic Republic and have basically announced their loyalty to the current Shah of Iran, right? The gentleman who's speaking, Reza Pahlavi. So there is a lot of moving parts behind the scenes, and I will definitely speak about that in another live stream, and I'll go into the military defections and sort of the relationship there. But for now, just a little bit of a primer on the IRGC. So, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I don't know why they say Iranian Revolutionary Guard, because again, there's that's misinformation right there. So that's deliberate misinformation from people who are trying to conflate the two. No one calls it the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Even in Farsi, in Persian, we don't call it the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. In Farsi, actually, it's called Sepah Pastaran, right? So this logo here, this is the logo of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You can see they got their Allah there or whatever. It's Arabic. And then this symbol here, I mean, if this looks familiar to you, that's because it is. That's very similar to what Hezbollah uses, right? And Hezbollah is a proxy of the Islamic Republic. So Hezbollah is a proxy of these people. It is fully funded by the Islamic Republic, even though Hezbollah is comprised of Lebanese Arab people. And then here, so on the logo of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, it says, let me just make it bigger for you. It says, Sepah Pastaran Enqilab Islami. So Sepah Pastaran Enqilab Islami. So again, nowhere in the logo of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps do we see the word Iran. There is, in fact, nothing here that would indicate that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is Iranian, except for the fact that the language is Farsi, okay? The language is Persian, and only Iranians speak Persian, but there's literally nothing Iranian about this. I mean, even like the Allahu Akbar, the Allah, right? Like it's all just very like Islamic jihadi nonsense. So that's the logo of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? So it's a multi-service primary branch of the Iranian armed forces. So the Iranian armed forces, that's the Artish, right? That's the military. So it was officially established by Khomeini, the evil cleric, there he is with his ugly jihadi face and cloak and turban, as a military branch in May 1979 in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. So this is the important part, and I'll just read this out for you guys, and I'll explain it, and then we'll go back to the interview. Where is the army? So this is what the king was talking about. Whereas the Iranian army protects the country's sovereignty in a traditional capacity. So the army of the country plays the same role as any army around the world, right? But the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' constitutional mandate is to ensure the integrity of the Islamic Republic. What does that mean? That means that every single time Iranian people try to rise up to overthrow the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, comes in, murders Iranians. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps comes in, brings in their proxy groups from around the Middle East, brings in people from, they bring in Hezbollah, they bring in Palestinians and like Hamas, they bring in the Houthis, they bring in like Hashd al-Shabi, like they'll bring in all of their proxy forces, many of them who are not even Iranian, to murder Iranians who are rising up. So, I know a lot of, one of the biggest questions that a lot of non-Iranians have is if Iranians, hate the regime so much, if Iranians despise the Islamic regime so much, why haven't you overthrown them? Well, the answer is there is literally an army that was established in 1979 for the specific purpose of murdering Iranians whenever they try to rise up to overthrow the Islamic Republic, right? So that's the definition of living in a totalitarian dictatorship. So because there is this Islamic army, right? This Islamic army was created in 1979 to protect the Islamic regime and to murder Iranians. So there's the answer to why Iranians are having difficulty overthrowing the Islamic Republic. It's because there's literally a military force mandated, right, created for the sole purpose of murdering people when they speak out. Okay, let's go back to the interview now. So that gives you a little bit of a primer on what the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is, why it was created, and why Iranians are having difficulty to overthrow the Islamic regime.
So you may be funding Hamas or Hezbollah, but there is an element of the IRGC involved in all these characteristics, which brings me to the point of why it is that I think if they...
Oh, I just wanted to, we have a start comment. The major, find Immortal, A Military History of Iran and Its Armed Forces by Stephen R. Ward. Best work on the subject in English. Oh, wow. Okay, thank you. I will definitely look into that. And I will find that book and I will give it a read. Thank you so much for the suggestion. I appreciate that, Major.
There's no shift in policy in terms of how do we deal with this regime? How do we weaken this regime? Whether it's its proxies or whether it's the regime itself, one of the issues on the table, which I think should be part of that policy, is the IRGC should be sanctioned and placed on a list of terrorist organizations. Some governments are looking at that, finding the legal way to do that. But if you do not show the Iranian people that we know the evil work that this regime is doing against you in repression at home and what it's doing in its proxy war, you cannot expect either Iranians at home or our immediate neighbors like the Israelis or the Saudis to think there's an actual means of responding to the regime. And in the meantime, what do we do in dealing with this situation? So it's not just limited to Iran. And why is it that it impacts America at the end of the day? Because I know many times I've heard Americans say, well, it's all the way over there. Why should we be dragged into it anymore? We had a...
So this is where he is going to respond to all of the isolationists, right? So all of the people who say, oh, we don't care what's happening in the Middle East. It has nothing to do with us. We're here in America. It's none of our business. He's going to counter that right now. And he's going to give you the information that you're not getting in mainstream media, right? Like he's going to give you the information that the Candace Owens and the Tucker Carlsons and all these people who defend the Islamic Republic, they don't want you to know. So you're about to get a very, very important breakdown here.
Bad experience in Afghanistan, we have a bad experience in Iraq. Once again, as taxpayers, we have to fund all these things, but none of this needs to happen when it comes to Iran. But you cannot hope to have an equal playing field where you don't empower the people of Iran without taking the teeth or the fangs out of this tiger that the regime is. It has to be declawed, literally. So you cannot have a chance of bringing real change in nations that want to have change by continuing to, in fact, reward this regime by giving them more means that they shouldn't have had in the first place. And that's the question that many Iranians ask. It says, you're not punishing the regime, you're in fact emboldening them by giving them more means to carry out their sinister goals.
You bring up the point that many of us Americans are tired of wars. We are also financially in distress right now. Our borders are porous. We have many problems here in America. And the idea of having to get involved in wars across the globe seems overwhelming as an understatement. And we're not sure if that's really our priority, because our priority has to be to take care of our own right now. And I'm curious, what is your answer to the possibility that we don't engage? What would happen if, we build a border here, we secure our country, we focus on America, and we let the Middle East deal with the Middle East? What would that look like?
Okay. First, I would say that America might say, well, we want to leave them alone. They won't leave you alone. That's the first thing. They're still coming after you.
How?
So by knowing that the biggest success that they
It's Shiva, you make a very good point. Let me just share this. I don't normally not share, I usually just share starred messages, but you sent a super sticker. So I just want to share this with everyone because this is such an important point. So she says, we don't want America to go to war with us. Just stop supporting our enemy. And that's exactly it. That's always been the call. We don't want boots on the ground. We don't want America to go to war. We don't need American money. All we're saying is stop legitimizing the Islamic Republic, right? Stop enabling them, stop throwing them a lifeline, give the Iranian people instead an opportunity to rise up and overthrow the Islamic regime. So thank you for that. It's Shiva, absolutely correct.
can have is to pretty much defeat what they always said from get-go, the great Satan, America, which is why they have always had such an hostile, antagonistic, as an ideological system against the West, represented chiefly by America. But I understand. I'm a taxpayer here. I don't want my money to end up being spent on wasted resources either. But you should not assume that the issue in Iran has to be a war. And let me explain you why. Because the dynamics of change in Iran is a matter of what is the agent for change in Iran. What is the element that can bring down the system? It's no other than the Iranian people themselves. It's your natural army on the ground already, except for they are fighting the fight with no support whatsoever. You won't need to engage America in any kind of conflict. In fact, I would be opposed in principle.
So Amir, the Shah is not actually an American citizen. His passport is from Monaco and citizenship is unspecified. So he's not actually an American citizen, but he's basically been living there since the revolution, because he was in Texas at the time that the Islamic Revolution happened. He was 18 years old. So he's pretty much been in America for most of it. But yeah, his passport is from Monaco and citizenship is unspecified.
In any kind of foreign intervention. But I do believe that if you bring in the necessary element of pressure on the regime, equaling the playing field for Iranians, you don't have to do anything much more than that, because the rest will be done by the people themselves. But we need to have a major shift in policy that has yet to exist in the Western world, because they're still in the mindset of cutting a deal and compromise and expecting behavior change, which was a flawed expectation to begin with, and simply proves there's a great deal of naivete in understanding that the DNA of this regime is one that it cannot be compatible and coexisting in the world as we know it. Because in their view, it's either you or them. There's no gray area. Therefore, what it is that, let's say, America could do,
yes,
to make a difference. Not just America, but America chiefly, because, when America leads, others probably follow. And the sense that I have always suggested a two-pronged approach, a parallel approach. One is a campaign of maximum pressure on the regime. That means in the form of sanctions, in forms of, example, putting the IRGC, which America has done that already. Your allies in Europe have yet to do that. But that simply means you're bringing more way of curtailing the regime's ability to have access in resources or do anything that they do regionally by the proxies or back home. Parallel to that, you have to have a component of maximum support. Let me give you two tacit examples. One of the key issues for those of us trying to coordinate efforts in terms of organizing whatever we need to organize against the regime is communication, which is vital. Access to the internet, free flow of information. And these are the kind of things that will facilitate Iranians not to be detached from the world and be disconnected from the world, which is something the regime is attempting to do all the time. And parallel to that, maybe find ways of giving financial means and support to encourage and assist in the case of labor strikes, which I think is the quickest way to paralyze the regime from within, by finding a way to fund it without a penny of American or others' tax dollars be spent on. How? There are many frozen assets, which is the Iranian people's money in the first place, that can be repurposed or allocated to support such campaigns of civil disobedience. All of this will contribute to a complete, leverage issue. But it's also important because when people see light at the end of the tunnel, when they see that there's actual solidarity, this time with them, finally, after 4 decades, when they see that this time the world is serious about telling the people of Iran, we had enough with this regime, we had given them ample opportunities to come clean, and they haven't. Meanwhile, the conflict is escalating, and this may become pretty soon an unavoidable conflict. The only solution that remains is put an end to this regime, but by helping the Iranian people bringing it down. But that requires some support. Many of these campaigns in other countries did not succeed without tacit support from the free world. The same case applies to Iran. And in that sense, you don't have to engage your troops. You don't have to spend your own money, but you can find ways of actually helping those campaigns within Iran to finally have a chance to be successful.
That's so important. So again, like, he's making the point very clear. He's saying we don't need American money. We don't need to engage American troops, but there are diplomatic ways of supporting the efforts of those who are trying to overthrow the Islamic Republic, right? So you guys have to keep in mind when you hear all of these alarmists who come out and then they start screaming about, oh, World War III, we don't want America to go to another war, we don't want to waste American money. These people are coming from a very bad and nefarious place. These are the same people who are constantly defending the Islamic Republic and trying to maintain its legitimacy. So one of the tactics that they use, right, it's this disinformation campaign where they try to convince Americans that the only way the regime can be overthrown in Iran is for America to go in and change it. And that is literally the farthest thing from the truth that anyone is saying. We have never said that. We will never say that. We don't want that, right? But these people are funded to spread that propaganda, to spread that narrative. Why? Because this is how they keep the Islamic regime in power. They keep the Islamic regime in power by making Americans think that the only thing that can change the Islamic regime is World War III, right? And then Americans, all of a sudden, they're like, oh, no, we don't want to support. We don't want World War III. Not understanding or not realizing that they are falling for the disinformation campaign that's being promoted by the Islamic regime and through the allies of the Islamic regime, including many pundits in the United States, right? Many pundits in the United States. And then there are, unfortunately, a lot of people who might not necessarily be as familiar with how the Islamic Republic operates. And because they always take a non-interventionalist stance, and because they don't know anything about Iran, they assume that Iran is like Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya or whatever. They'll just automatically lump in Iran with those other countries, not understanding that Iran is a completely different scenario, completely different society. And prior to the Islamic takeover of Iran in 1979, Iran was a fully functioning democratic constitutional monarchy, right? So that Islamist narrative, unfortunately, has propagated the media quite a bit, and even a lot of people who don't know much about Iran will push that narrative or promote that narrative just because they don't know any better. So again, like what he is saying is we don't need American money. We don't need troops on the ground. There's no need to start World War III. The only ask from Iranian people is stop legitimizing the Islamic regime. Stop making deals with them. Stop giving them money, right? Because the more money you give them, the more they're able to fund terrorism, the more they are able to remain in power by strengthening the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Again, what's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps? The IRGC is that paramilitary branch that they created in order to maintain power and in order to remain in power. So when you send them money, the money does not go to the Iranian people. The money goes to terrorism. It goes to the IRGC. It goes to Hezbollah. It goes to Hamas. It goes to the Houthis, right? So that's where the misinformation really comes in, and then it drowns out the people. Okay, I have a question. Let me pull this up. So, Oh My says, do you know what countries or people are funding the Islamic regime? I just got on. It's very interesting, and I'm learning a lot. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining. Great, always great to see new people come and join us. So, Oh My, I appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're liking this. So, the two major funders of the Islamic Republic are Russia and China. Of course, surprise, surprise. They do a lot of deals. They do a lot of deals with the Islamic Republic behind the scenes. So there you go. And my understanding is that the Islamic Republic has been sort of circumventing some of the economic sanctions put on by the United States with the help of China. Although now that President Trump has come back into power, that seems to be going down a bit. But the two major trading partners of the Islamic Republic are Russia and China.
It also facilitates the transition post-regime. Because I know that some of the concern is, are we going to have a scenario of chaos? Is it going to be a vacuum that is not filled? Are we going to have some...
That's the other thing. So this goes to the whole narrative of people are like, oh, we don't want another Libya or Iraq or Afghanistan, you know, like if the regime is changed, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be civil war. Again, that's another narrative that's pushed by the Islamic Republic in order to prevent the world from supporting Iranians who want to overthrow it. I mean, we were a fully functioning constitutional monarchy prior to 1979, and that is what many of us want to go back to. And in fact, he's going to mention this a little bit, but we do have a plan for the day after the Islamic Republic is overthrown. And I will be speaking about the day after plan in a future episode. So make sure that you're following me because I go live Monday to Fridays at 12 noon Eastern. So definitely want to be around for that because I'm going to break down the day after plan for you. So he does mention it very, very briefly here. But there have been some major updates since this interview. Let me go back just a little bit, and then we'll continue on.
People bringing it down, but that requires some support. Many of these campaigns in other countries did not succeed without tacit support from the free world. The same case applies to Iran. And in that sense, you don't have to engage your troops. You don't have to spend your own money, but you can find ways of actually helping those campaigns within Iran to finally have a chance to be successful. It also facilitates the transition post-regime. Because I know that some of the concern is, are we going to have a scenario of chaos? Is it going to be a vacuum that is not filled? Are we going to have some situation of anarchy and instability? Well, what I'm suggesting is that this strategy includes a controlled implosion with a plan for transition post-regime into the next phase and has its component. And it also includes maximum defections from the regime, because unlike what happened, example, what happened post-Saddam Hussein in Iraq and de-Baathification, which was disastrous in terms of consequence, this time we're not saying that everybody on the job has to disappear. So long as their hand is not soiled in Iranian people's blood, they can survive regime change and they can have a place and a role to play in the future.
Right. So what he's saying here is that, there are a lot of people that are within the government, right? The government that's controlled by the Islamic Republic, who are not criminals themselves, right? Like they're just part of the government, right? There's a lot of technocrats, a lot of bureaucrats, right? A lot of people whose job is, running the day-to-day affairs of the country, to the best of their ability, because it is an Islamic dictatorship. But what he's saying is that there is a place for these people the day after the Islamic Republic is overthrown, right? Like the country is not going to go into a state of chaos. These people are not going to necessarily lose their jobs, unless, like he says, their hands are covered in blood. So if someone is a terrorist or a murderer or, a criminal, of course, they're going to have to, go to court and face justice. But it's not like that, like this revolution is not like to go in and just, overhaul all of the technocrats and bureaucrats. No, in fact, those technocrats and bureaucrats are a very important part of the revolution, and they're a very important part of the overthrow of the Islamic regime, and in maintaining the stability of the country as we transition from a totalitarian Islamic dictatorship to a functioning secular democracy.
So you're talking about a national reconciliation based on amnesty and not revenge, not on retribution, while justice can still exist for people who have to seek that. But in the spirit of more of a sort of what happened in the case of South Africa, truth and reconciliation, those kind of approaches, which means that this is the path of least resistance for those who can now join us, who are disillusioned former reformists who know that now we have to go beyond this regime, which is the collective ask.
There's also one thing I just wanted to bring up really quickly. This is something I'm going to talk about in a later podcast, but I just want to bring it up really quickly because when he speaks about bringing people in and the revolution is going to be in the spirit of it's not going to be revenge. He's actually set up a website. So him and his team have set up a website where, the title is called Iran Pas Migirیم, which means we will reclaim Iran. And there's actually, where is it? Let me go down here. Where are the forms here? So, where is it? Is it here? Yeah, so there's an option on the website to register, right? So if you're defecting, there's an option on the website where if you are currently part of the Islamic Republic, like let's say you're a technocrat or a bureaucrat, you're a civil servant or whatever the case might be, there is an option for you to register, okay, and declare your loyalty to the Shah's leadership, basically, and you basically commit to working with the transitional government. So there is an exit option here, right? So a year ago, when he was speaking about how there's going to be an opportunity for those who are currently within the Islamic Republic to defect and join the people, this is exactly what he's talking about, this website. And I will share the English version and I'll go through all of it in a different podcast. But I just wanted to say, everything that he speaks about, everything that he speaks about has pretty much been done or is in the process of being done.
In that sense, the world is lagging behind. Iranians today have come to the conclusion that as much as they try to reform this regime, it cannot happen. And they're fed up with it. And they want to move beyond that. And that's where you have to connect the dots and see, as a matter of foreign policy, as a Western democracy, with the values that we all cherish, which is the same thing the Iranian people want. Why are we wasting time trying to reason with a regime that in its entire comportment is the most alien to these values? And we as Iranians, and me having lived in this country for almost 4 decades, and appreciate everything that is incorporated in your system of justice and separation of powers and the guarantees that exist and the institutions and the role of media and this and that. And we would like to be able to do the same thing for ourselves in Iran. We are natural partners in this. And I'm just conveying to you a message on behalf of millions of my compatriots to say, if not now, when? How many more generations have to be sacrificed? How much more do we have to endure? And Americans should not think that by not us doing something, we won't be engaged. You'll be dragged into it whether you liked it or not. It will still impact you economically because the regime continues to, for instance, by supporting the Houthis, certainly disrupting maritime traffic. Certainly it has an impact on oil prices and what have you. So it's not like America can all of a sudden go into some sort of a introverted mode that we are disconnecting from everything else and then we'll be fine. That's not going to be the reality of things. But if you want to minimize the cost for yourself in terms of your national security interests, in terms of your economic interests, I'll go beyond about what it is that you're missing. Imagine the potential that would be good for American entities and business if tomorrow Iran opens its door and says, we are open for business, come and invest and help us rebuild our country. And it's a win-win situation. So we need to start thinking what a different Iran could provide in terms of our interests, rather than, well, we don't want to be dragged into conflict anymore. Because that means that nobody thinks beyond the status quo. And we should start talking about beyond the status quo.
So I'm going to stop it there because we're coming up to the 2-hour mark and I don't want to rush through. We still have about half of this interview left. So we're definitely going to continue this next week. I wanted to thank you all for joining. I wanted to give a shout out to our new members, Ahmed and Scott. And of course, thank you to the rest of the members for being here. And of course, to everyone who supported with a super sticker or super chat. VKC, thank you as well for your support. If you enjoy what I am doing, please make sure that you like and subscribe. I go live daily from Monday to Fridays at 12 noon Eastern, and I talk about various issues, but all related to Islamic terrorism, jihad, the Middle East, North America. And guys, I just want to let you know, I got a lot of positive feedback about my information and my live streams regarding the Nigerian genocide. So based on your requests and by popular demand, I will be bringing Yuri back on Thursday to give us an update on what's happening in Nigeria with the Christian genocide of Nigerians by Muslims. So thank you again for joining, guys. I appreciate all of your support. And until next week, Payanda Iran, Javid Shah.